Okay, we're moving on this morning. And last Friday, Allyson West was actually sworn in as Senator and the Minister within the Ministry of Finance. Ms. West, well, as you would have heard, she worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers out one of the tax leaders before basically taking up her appointment. And it does, in fact, raise some questions, not over her character or her suitability or anything like that, but the immediate switch to governance. Now, Dennise Demming, she's congratulated her and holds Ms. West in high regard. However, good governance, transparency and accountability are the topics at the forefront of her mind. And she's here with us this morning because she believes that Trinidad and Tobago fails at governance because the systems are weak. Good morning, Ms. Demming.
Good morning.
What systems are you speaking about specifically?
Every single system. You tell me, over the last 10, 15 years, what system do we have in place has improved? What system requires accountability, transparency, and collaboration? I can't think of very many of them. When you look at the society overall, you look at the top levels, things are falling apart. And things don't just fall apart. It's been happening for a while. And there really is very little attention being paid to what are the systemic issues that we need to be addressing and how do we strengthen those systems, how do we improve those systems so that we operate in a context in which you have very little information. You know, and the government is absolutely right to determine whoever it wishes to appoint to whatever position. However, I pause when I reflect on someone who today or yesterday acted as a tax administrator or acted with one of the largest accounting companies, and in their portfolio they may have had large organizations on whose behalf they are acting with regard to taxation issues. And today that person who represents that same organization may have to administer, may have to provide a judgment, and that bothers me as a citizen. Just as when Volney jumped, was almost parachuted from the bench onto politics. He went to sleep one night as a judge, woke up the next morning as a politician. Those things eat at the very fabric of our society. And I'm simply making the case that we need a lot more transparency. We need good governance if this society is going to survive.
So who should be undertaking a review of these systems to actually try to fix it, to sort it out, so that there isn't that, as you say, go to sleep one morning, one thing, and wake up the next morning, something else?
Unfortunately, it is whoever the party in power is who becomes the government. They have lead responsibility on strengthening the systems. And I think that over the last, let's say, 20 years, no government has taken on systemic change as something that is critical. I'll give you an example. In 2010, it took you 2 weeks to get a passport. 2 weeks. How is it we move from 2010 to 2017 and it's 3 months?
Unless you expedite it and you get it in a week, you pay more money to expedite.
So what is the message that we're sending there? And you know, I may be stretching a point here, but the message is, if you have money, you can get anything. We have a nice name for it now. You can expedite a passport. What is that? So if I'm a poor person and I don't have that money, how do I expedite? So the real issue has to do with governance.
So how do we sort out this governance, transparency, which, I mean, that has been the talk for so long, you know, people asking for transparency and accountability. How do we force the hand of the powers that be to go that way and to avoid what is happening right now?
Unfortunately, the powers that be seldom respond to citizens like myself who would just make a comment on things like that. They only respond, and I absolutely believe this, they only respond to high pressure. So until people in our society begin to put pressure on whichever government to say that, listen, governance is important, transparency is important, until we start to do the systemic issues and start to really put pressure to change the systems, then It's hopeless.
But who has to put pressure? That's the thing. I mean, individuals like you and myself, I mean, we can only say so much. We would think that it would be greater powers, greater institutions who would have to do that. Do you think they have the will to do that?
It's not the will. It is that there are too many people vested at the moment in the outcomes that exist in our current horrible systems. So until we remove the benefit that they derive, then we're going to continue to have this. And that goes all the way back to campaign financing. I mean, the most recent issue with, I don't want to call it, some of our most recent issues, you have to ask yourself who benefits. And as long as people continue to benefit from the system, they have no interest, because people think that they can isolate themselves from some of the societal issues. And we can't. It is just a matter of time before the population rises up and says, enough is enough. When you have children can't get into a primary school.
And some have to resit.
That's a systemic issue, So to me, there's a need to identify one area and say, all right, we're changing the system in this area and let's see the benefits, because that's how change management occurs. You identify a specific area, you work on it, you celebrate the wins, and then you continue to roll it over. And that's how you get that kind of momentum to say that the systemic change has to happen. But we are really not seeing anybody tackling systemic change. But it's a government responsibility. And I've been hearing the talk that the people have to do it. Well, the people can't. The people take the lead from the government. And if, for example, there's a proper performance appraisal system, then people will change and people will conform. But if there's no consequence, people will not conform.
Which is why we see so much lawlessness out there as well. Is there any country from whom we can take pattern with respect to this?
Well, New Zealand transformed their public service very well. But I am not one of those proponents of just taking pattern, because our culture is different. So that I'm a proponent of where is the latent knowledge that exists in this society that we can come up with? What are the changes that we need to implement? So, for example, as a citizen, I can't tell you what is the strategic direction of this country for the next 5 to 7 years. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you are little things that they're going to be doing, or governments are doing, in order to get quick wins. Well, I have news. Quick wins are not sustainable. So there's a need, for example, for Trinidad to say, in 5 to 7 years, this is what we want. This is the kind of society we want. And get people on board with that. Trinidad did a very good job of what was Vision 2020. That was something that was collaborative. I mean, it included 500 citizens of this country. So that gave us, you may not have agreed with some of the details of it, but at least it gave you a longer term vision. Where is the equivalent of that now? People may tell me there's a Vision 2030, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it is being articulated. I'm not sure that the goals and objectives are out there so that as a citizen I can buy into it. For example, we have a tremendous problem with flooding.
Yes.
All right?
And it seems to be worse this year.
That is an engineering problem. After you've solved the engineering problem, then you have to solve the behavior problem. You walk around Port of Spain, you can't find a dustbin.
Oh, yes. True.
So that there are little things that can be done. You hear the politicians talk about, we did this cleanup, we did that cleanup, we did that cleanup. Well, it has not worked. So that we need leadership. And what I think is really not happening is that inspired leadership that makes us feel as citizens, this is where we're going. I can line up behind this because this is a strategic vision for 5 to 7 years. I've lived long enough to know that if your strategic vision is less than 5 to 7 years, you're wasting my time. And that's how I feel at the moment.
Now, you speak of Vision 2020, but governments have a time. Governments come, governments go. Sometimes that vision is not carried out. It changes depending on who's in power, who's the government of the day. So what do we do in a situation like that then?
Our politicians have to be a little more mature and stop doing things like, I didn't propose to Ruba Stadium, therefore it will sit for 5 years. You know, that to me should be a jailable offense. We have to have continuity. Governments, and you know, there's an analogy a Barbadian friend of mine uses. He says, I don't understand you Trinis. He says, in Barbados, when we change governments, we hand over the baton. In Trinidad, when you change governments, you start over the race. He says you go back to the start line and you start running again. No society can sustain that. And to me, what is required is, as we have the changes of government, and you know, over the last, I think, 15 to 20 years, we've changed governments every 5 years. And if you know that that's a given, well, do something now. Because until there are projects that span the 5-year period, we will continue with this, doing it over. And what is required now is for our governments, when they come into power, to be mature enough to say, all right, what worked? What is feasible? What is in the best interest? How can I continue this? Okay, there has been an investment. If there has been an investment, how do I ensure that this investment benefits the people of Trinidad and Tobago? You cannot take 24 months to decide on big ticket items. You know, there ought to be some parallel system. If you're interested in identifying people who did whatever illegal and so on, that could be one parallel. But what about the continued development? What's the other parallel with that? And there's several examples of that. You have the houses in the Diego Martin area that have just stood still. And almost 7 years later, some of them remain unoccupied. What is the message you are giving to our people? It's a message of, you know, winner take all, and I will dominate, I will tell you what to do, as opposed to, how can we make this place livable for all of us? And that is really what inspired that blog that I wrote. It has to do with sitting and looking at our society and saying, you know, we miss so many opportunities. But the issues are systemic.
They are.
Total.
And again, come back to the whole issue of how do we get, because you said it's a government issue, they have to be the ones to really try to make these changes, to start to make these changes. How do we, the people, get them to do that? We are supposed to have the power. We don't seem to think that we have the power enough to initiate change, except vote them in, vote them out. That apparently seems to be the only thing that we seem to have power with. So how do we, as citizens, as people of Trinidad and Tobago, get our government to do this?
We have to start objecting. We have to start making our voices heard. I blog, I write, I comment.
But you're one person.
Yes,
there are others out there too, but still in little pockets.
You know, you're pushing me to say something for which I might end up in prison. That's not a desirable place for me. So I'm not going to say that. But until governments see an articulated response to whatever the issues are, until people demonstrate that they are serious and they're prepared to hold you up to a higher ideal, we're going to have more of the same.
Do you think that maybe we should teach governance in secondary school? Because I remember doing it at training college, and that was like after I left school. So do you think that that should be a core subject in secondary schools?
That's one end of it, because that's in the longer term vision. But I really think that everybody who is going to put themselves up for political office should attend some governance school, so that they understand what their role is. You know, and what we do very well in this society is we do the workaround. So, for example, our state enterprises were developed in the main to get around the Central Tenders Board. All right? Then they became the personal domain of ministers. So ministers will use them to distribute or to attempt to distribute resources. So we now have a dysfunctional public service whose roles in terms of the Central Tenders Board has been circumvented by some special purpose companies. We now have special purpose companies that are dysfunctional because of how they've been set up. What we need to do is to fix the system. As a post-colonial society, we cannot operate with the systems and processes and procedures that our colonizers left. So we need to start by reviewing those systems. You know, and a big lament I have, and I looked on the Arthur Lodge Graduate School of Business website last night, and they were boasting that they've graduated 1,000 MBAs and they've trained 20,000 persons. I would imagine that in a population of 1.3 million, when you have 1,000 MBAs and 20,000 trained persons, you will see a change in behavior.
Yeah, you should.
But we're not seeing it. So there's something that is missing.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous opportunity for whoever governments are to determine, how can I change the system? How do I review, revise, ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are at the center of these systems? How can I ensure that my systems are transparent? How can I ensure that we have good governance? And that, to me, is just sad that we are losing that opportunity.
Dennise Demming, I think you spoke much of what many Trinbagonians would like to see, and we're hoping to see. We have to wait to see whether that is actually going to become a reality. But it is up to us to put the pressure as well on the powers that be to ensure that that does happen. I want to thank you for coming this morning and telling us some more about this, expatiating some more about this, because we need to hear it as many times as we can. We need to hear it until something gets done. So thank you so much.
Thank you ever so much.
Dennise Demming with us this morning on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. We've got much more to come, so you need to stay with us.